Well, so I'd like to call this meeting of the Silver Falls School Board to order, and please note attendance, Denise. Welcome, everyone. Good to see so many faces. We're going to jump right into discussion items. Our first item, Eugene Field, input from Silver Falls administrators. Linda.
All right. So I will be the voice for the administrative team tonight, and we wanted to come and share some information with you. We have met on two separate occasions, just the administrative team as a whole, to discuss the Eugene Field issue, and those meetings occurred after the bond failed. And the first discussion was centering on our belief that this is not just a Eugene Field issue. This is not Jennifer's problem to solve. This is our problem to solve. Those are our kids. They end up in our high school, and they belong to all of us. So we very quickly centered on what are some core agreements that we can come to as a leadership team. And so one of those core agreements was that we believe that the time for committees on this topic is done. It starts to feel a little bit like the movie Groundhog's Day, where you are just living the same thing over and over again, and every time the alarm clock rings, we're having the same conversation. Since 1997, there have been 7 facilities committees or task force established on this topic. There were some prior to that, and fundamentally, their recommendations have all been the same. Each committee will conclude and will agree that the building can in fact be remediated. We can remediate any building out there, but the general consensus is that it is not cost effective to do so. And though your administrative team does not necessarily have 100% agreement on all of the nuances of the future planning for the district, there are a few core agreements that we have come to. And number one, that is we need to get out of Eugene Field, and we believe that it is time to take a vote, make a decision, and move on. We have collected input and information for 20 years. We are not in the business, as your administrative team, we are not in the business of managing facilities. We are not buildings people. We are teaching and learning people, and we are experts in teaching and learning. And the core solution to this problem must come to an agreeable solution for teaching and learning for all 3,600 students in this district. Right now, we are prioritizing the kids that sit at Eugene Field School. So we left no option off the table. That was one of our agreements. Our group norms when we came together was, if it's an idea, we will talk about it. If it's a ridiculous idea, we will talk about it. But we talked for hours, and we disagreed, and we were emotional, and we were passionate, and at certain times we may have even been angry. But the team talked about every possible option, and we rejected some of those options. We rejected soundly the concept of revoking out-of-district transfers. The financial impact for the district as a whole does not leave that as a sound option for the district. Loss of that kind of revenue would likely force the district to close some of our smaller schools. We've made a commitment to the community. Through our visioning process, we have identified as a core value the uniqueness of each community here in the district, and we are committed to keeping those buildings open. Revoking out-of-district transfers does not solve this problem. The other thing that we soundly rejected was this concept of moving modulars to K-8 buildings and simply dispersing the Eugene Field students to the rural schools. One of our other core values is, I guess it's the same core value, the uniqueness of our schools and our communities. Eugene Field right now is one of those established communities. Breaking that community up and dispersing it and disbanding it to K-8 land where there isn't space anyways doesn't make any sense. It disrupts all of the educational settings across the district, and it violates one of our core values by disbanding one of our community schools, which is Eugene Field. An additional option that we rejected soundly was this concept of keeping a smaller population at Eugene Field and redrawing the boundaries and dispersing some of the students out to K-8 buildings. That concept hasn't gotten a lot of leverage, but we talked about it. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no way 2/3 of that population, 3/4 of that population will fit in our current settings. We have just a few buildings with vacant classrooms. Those vacant classrooms will not accommodate the kinds of students that would need to move out of Eugene Field. We discussed the concept of split shifts at Robert Frost. That has gotten a little bit of traction. We did some fairly legitimate research. The only time that split shifts have been embraced in communities is in the case of crisis or emergency. Vernonia has a flood. They lose a building immediately. They have no other viable option for tomorrow. They move to the concept of split shifting. We could find no educational research anywhere in the nation that would advocate for split shifting as a long-term solution and a viable solution that maintains the integrity of teaching and learning that we value. The other thing we talked about was what about other buildings in the community, churches and whatnot. Pretty quickly stumbled upon significant code compliance issues and enough of that to reject all of those options. So very quickly, we took lots of discussions off the table. And again, those rejected options were not met with resistance after we were able to review the research and review sort of the causal thinking behind why won't these options work. So we identified some items to explore. So the first one of those being sources of additional revenue. There are both buildings and property that are currently held by the school district. Some of those may be currently in use for other venues, but you gotta liquidate something. Whether that's surplus property at Robert Frost, whether that's other assets that the district has, we need a viable source of revenue, and that needs to get some attention quickly. The other item that we obviously believe warrants some additional consideration is the use of current facilities. We focused in on Schlater, Robert Frost, and Mark Twain, and should this be the direction that the board would choose to head, educationally and instructionally, our recommendation would be to remodel Schlater for grades 6 through 8, Robert Frost to accommodate students in grades 3, 4, and 5, and move grades K2 to Mark Twain. Mark Twain currently has 19 available classrooms. K2 would require 15 classrooms for general ed, but that also leaves additional space for Title I, LRC, music. We need a covered play area up at Mark Twain, and we need some conversations about bathroom options for big kids versus little kids. But in general, the size of that building would accommodate the number of students and the number of classrooms that we need there. Robert Frost would house grades 3, 5 with minimal to no transition whatsoever. And Schlater works for grades 6, 7, and 8 with 3 double modulars. So that uses the 16 available rooms at Schlater plus the multi-purpose room, the office, the gym, and several other small spaces. And moving middle school to Schlater saves you on playground costs.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Could you go over this scenario again?
Mm-hmm.
You give a very good delivery, but it's a little fast.
Yes.
Keep up and take
You got
notes.
it. So
I appreciate that.
K2 at Mark Twain. There are
Okay.
19 available classrooms at Mark Twain. We require 15 for K2 Gen Ed.
Okay,
And so that leaves the additional cushion for title, LRC, music, specialists, whatnot. 3, 4, 5 at Robert Frost. Minimal, if any, transition there. 6, 7, 8 at Schlater with 6 additional classrooms, so 3 double modulars. So that utilizes the 16 rooms that are currently at Schlater with the multi-purpose room, the gym, the office, and some of those smaller.
so you would
classroom
propose
spaces.
to add space to Robert Frost?
Don't need it. It currently houses 3 grades.
And would there be remodeling involved with Mark Twain?
We would need to look at fixtures in the bathrooms, but in general, furniture goes out, furniture goes to Schlater, little kid furniture comes in. The classrooms themselves accommodate any size child that you choose to put in it.
Okay.
If you're gonna answer this later, just tell me quiet, but why did you choose Mark Twain for K2 versus Robert Frost for K2?
I think we talked, as we discussed that, I think we talked the number of classrooms available.
The walls.
Oh, That's right, yeah. We don't like primary age kids in Robert Frost because those are not closed classrooms. With the open pod concept at Robert Frost, that's a lot more difficult to maintain the noise of a K1
It's an educational
classroom. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Jen. That's right.
For the Schlater Street part of it, where does that put the community roots?
So that proposal displaces community roots. And so I'll address community roots in some secondary information that I have for you as well.
Okay, so how does this scenario mesh with your earlier statement that it was not acceptable to break up the Eugene Field community? That it was a learning community that should be kept intact.
Well, and the reality is that when you have 75%, so you are maintaining the K2 community, and we're simply shifting third graders up into a building that they will transition into naturally anyways. All those third graders move to Robert Frost. That sort of shift is instructionally and educationally, that doesn't disband an entire building. When we're talking about moving, Eugene Field can retain an identity as a K2 building, Robert Frost can retain an identity as a 3-5 building, and Mark Twain can retain an identity as a middle school. So the core of that does not, doesn't feel disrupted.
And one more question. So K2 and Mark Twain, did you say no modulars are required there?
Correct.
Okay.
But a cover play area would be.
Some sort of, something. We can transplant the actual equipment from Eugene Field, but you need some sort of three-sided, some sort of extension.
Can't the gym function as it does now?
Covered plate. Well, the gym would be the cafeteria, so you can't have recess and lunch at the same time.
The cafeteria isn't, don't they have a kind of, I don't know, how do they have the cafeteria now?
They use the stage, so kids
Yeah.
eat, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but I believe lunch is served on the stage, and then the gym serves as the cafeteria where the students actually eat.
No, they eat up on the stage too.
Oh, they eat on the stage as well? Okay.
Yeah.
But if there's classes or there's not having class and lunch at the same time, doesn't work. And they really need to be outside running around, you know.
Yes.
Even the middle school
Primary
kids need to
children
be.
especially. The other concept that we spent quite a bit of time exploring might be brand new to you, but there are pretty significant financial savings. And this concept would put kids in facilities with minimal to no expense to the facilities themselves, other than some costs that are associated with opening Schlater back up as far as things like the traffic study and things like that. So this is a concept that is used in many districts. It's very popular in California right now. This is a concept of a multi-track year-round setting. And by year-round, we don't necessarily mean 12 months a year. There still is a summer break, but there's a concept of you move to a multi-track system. And by doing that, you can increase the capacity of each facility by about 33%. So this is where, Julie, this sort of dialogue allows us to retain community roots. So let me just walk you through this scenario. And I don't want to do this to confuse anyone or to just add more fuel to the fire, but it's something we discussed at length, and so we felt it had merit to at least bring to you. So you put K1 and community roots at Schlater, and you take that population size, and they are on a 4-track system. So only 3 of the 4 tracks are on site at any time. So students attend school for 60 days in a row, and then they have 20 days off. And that rotation continues just about all year until you come to a common summer break where everyone has 20 days off, essentially in August. But the concept is you gain 33% space, capacity, because one track of your student population and staff population is always off. So the districts that have done this have embraced the concept of year-round schooling in order to avoid the 10 or 12-week break where kids are losing content academically and are having to come back and we're having to play catch-up. But they also have done it. It appeared that most of the districts that I was researching in California have moved to this philosophically as an instructional model first. There was one specific district that talked about using this as a model in order to increase the capacity of their facilities. But there definitely is research and evidence to support both. So the concept would be you have K1 and community roots at Schlater Obviously, community roots would have to agree to track, so they would be agreeing to change to a year-round calendar. But then you can put actually grades 2 through 5 at Robert Frost in the current setting. So you maintain the 3 pods, but you can manage 4 grades in that system because of the tracking. You always have 1 track of your kids off for 20 days. It also allows you at Mark Twain to put all 3 grades for the middle school in the current facility setup. So you can move 6th graders up to Mark Twain, track them, and you don't require any additional space. Now, obviously, this has some logistical pieces that come along with it. It is a philosophical shift. I will say that your admin team is pretty supportive of some continued conversation about the potential year-round model. We haven't explored that with staff necessarily. Our conversations were behind closed doors, and we haven't necessarily advertised that. But there was not resistance to the concept of a year-round calendar from your administrative team at all. It's an innovative solution. It's something that does not have a ton of fiscal impact, but it does have significant impact in other areas. So again, we didn't lay that in front of you to muddy the waters necessarily, but because when we met, we agreed to talk about every viable option. And as we began to talk about all of those viable options, we weren't able to identify enough reasons to reject that option, as we were able to very cleanly with some of the earlier things that I mentioned.
So with the 20 days off, was there any research done on the studies of how that really affects the kids academically? Because, you know, when kids go away for vacation, Christmas, I know other teachers have said, you know, it's kind of like starting over every 20 days, that I would think that would be a really kind of a hard shift for the kids to maintain a certain academic level. And has there been research on that was looked into at all?
So I don't have Oregon data and based on Oregon state assessments, but some of the California districts were able to, they basically shared test scores that were commensurate with when they held a traditional year-round calendar, and in 1 or 2 instances there were increased scores. The one school, or the one district that was reporting increased scores, used those 20 days off as an opportunity for some intervention for their highest risk kids. So they didn't necessarily go completely off. They're
doing summer school during the 20 days.
Essentially, there is some sort of either intervention group. You come in, you know, for 90 minutes in the morning just for reading group, or that again is another layer of complexity, logistics and planning and things like that, and space becomes an issue for something like that. But there was more than one district that moved to kind of this intervention model during the 20 days off. And I'm assuming for that exact reason that you're
Was there
suggesting.
anything for the accelerated students?
I didn't dig for that on purpose. I don't know.
Well, this is interesting to me because in the aftermath of the financial crisis, we talked about the possibility of a 4-day week. And I recall that the administrative staff, and you actually led that discussion with the board, opposed the 4-day school week because the additional day off per week would have such a dramatic impact on learning. And some at a loss to understand how 20 days absence, 60 days on, 20 days off,
Right.
all year would not have
And in all honesty, David,
a significant impact. I mean,
so let me back up.
it's an interesting, I'm not, you know.
No, I know, and in all honesty, I don't recall that conversation.
And I'm really happy to
So-
see some ideas, because one of the things that I've said all along is that we have not explored all of the possibilities here. We had a very narrow focus for a while. So this is very interesting.
So I can't respond to your recollection of the 4-day week conversation because, in all honesty, I don't recall. I do remember at some point there being a conversation about a 4-day work week. I don't recall. I've sat in front of you too many times to remember everything I've told you. And my gut response now would be, I would question the academic difference in a 3-day weekend versus a 2-day weekend. But I don't know. I'm not saying that I didn't say that at some point, but I would say that if you were to ask me that question today, I don't know that I would react strongly to, I think I would tend to react more strongly to the length of time that kids would be in school when you cram all of those hours into a 4-day week. But we didn't explore a 4-day week. It doesn't help us with facilities.
Right. I'm just asking about the learning, the gap, the time time off. And
What about the K-8s in this scenario?
So, thank you, that's the other piece, and I neglected to say that.
And the high school.
In that scenario, high school stays traditional calendar, and that's what almost all the districts have done, that have moved year-round, high schools have stayed traditional. So it does move us away from that common calendar, which we've just moved to, but you can't manage the extracurriculars. The kids can't compete in athletics, in a 60-20 rotation. So, and I trying to think if there were any districts, trying to think if there were any one high school districts. I don't remember off the top of my head. Several of the districts in California were multi, 2 or 3 high school districts. So a bit larger than we were, and does it make it more feasible to have a high school on its own standalone calendar when there's more than one high school? Potentially. There may be some impact there. But I think, we could talk for hours, days, years, decades, people already have. Our concern at this point is that we don't have a definitive timeline and we don't have a definitive deadline. And for the sake of the kids and the staff and the community, we need to be done talking about the if, and we need to begin talking about the when. It's time to get out of Eugene Field. Your administrative team wholeheartedly believes that and supports that. Call for a vote, and I'm confident that we have enough energetic, well-intentioned, purposeful brains that we can identify the best outcome on the other end. Give us a deadline.
With the 4-day week or the 60-20 rotation, our goal has been so hard to find this 95% attendance rate, and I just think that kind of is contradicting what our goal has been. I know that there would still be the idea that they would be here, but I think it kind of falls into that area where it's less likely you're going to have that.
So one of the things that we as an administrative team agreed to do as well was to not just rely on our opinions, but to see what the research tells us. So we haven't done any research into that, and so I would be hesitant to comment on that. That's a perception at this point, and we have no data to support or negate that perception. So I would be interested in chasing down some attendance data from districts that have moved from traditional calendars to a 60-20 track, and we could certainly do that if that topic deserves more consideration. But that was one of the things, in order to sort of remove that emotion from our conversation and the concepts of, well, I think, we really forced ourselves to back up and say, well, what does the research say?
It'd be nice to see more of the research on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge philosophical shift. It would require a lot more digging. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it would be interesting to see the community's reaction to this proposal, given the fact that we're afraid to touch attendance boundaries. This is a much more dramatic shift, a much more radical concept.
Yeah, potentially.
Adjusting attendance boundaries to manage the student populations in our various schools.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and again, that's perception. I don't have a response to that. I don't know. I have a personal response as a mother. It would be, my mother response would be, my students' homeschool is very, very important to me. I don't know what my response would be if, they're at school for 5 weeks and then off for 3. I don't know.
So it sounds like the scenario came about around discussions with Community Roots. Did you talk at all about moving Community Roots to one of the other sites, such as Scottsville Hills? Do you have room?
We didn't explore Community Roots. To be perfectly honest with you, Community Roots is your responsibility, not ours.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's fair.
What's your logic for saying call a vote before we know what we want to do with them?
So I guess, Tom,
if I don't know where they're going to go,
Mhm.
I don't know if I want to call for a vote. I know what my answer is because I don't know where they're going to go. So,
Right.
I love the ideas. This is awesome. But anyway, I want to flesh that out. I feel like there's a hurry. There obviously is a hurry.
Mhm.
But why do we have to call for a vote? And it might encourage us to rush into the wrong solution is what I'm worried about.
So I think you have a body of experts. There are 13 of us when we all sit around the table, And yes, we could continue to sit around and talk about it for hours and hours and hours on end, but I also know that we happen to be very good at what we do, and I believe that you are good at what you do, and given a deadline, we would rise to the occasion. No one is going to do these kids wrong. Without a deadline, are we perpetuating the continued dialogue, the 7 facilities committees since 1997 that have already said all of the same things? Where let's value and affirm the time that the people embedded in those. That's likely hundreds of people who gave up their nights and their weekends and or whatever, time away from their family to volunteer for a task force or facilities committee, and we've done that now over and over and over again.
Oh, I have no problem with the motivation for finding a solution is because I'm tired of giving up my weekends.
Yeah.
I'm tired, so I don't need that.
Right.
We're on the same page.
So I think our response is, given a deadline, we would actually have a solution, a good one.
So, go ahead.
Well, that's okay. I think, all of this is very interesting, and I'm really happy to hear from the administrative team. I was elected to represent the public interest here, and clearly the public interest and the direction that the board has taken are not really aligned at the moment. If you look at the recent bond election votes, they were pretty lopsided votes.
I take exception to that, David.
Yeah, that's your opinion, David.
Well, it is my opinion.
We have different-
57-43 is a landslide.
And I think what they voted against was bonding a project. So people don't want to let their property taxes go up, and I fully understand that, and I think we need to respect that and move forward with the scenario that we can do without asking for bond dollars. But Linda brought here, what I took away from it, we can put 3 modulars on site here, put a covered play area at North Twain. We pretty well have it covered. I think we can then get ready some surplus property, pay for it. I think we have revenue coming in still from Robert Frost and from monitor sale. We might be able to finance this ourselves with those dollars coming in.
The monitor sale money is already all in, but, the opinion, it's just opinion and conjecture as to why people voted the way they did. We haven't done any research, we haven't had any data, any real
The
data.
data is that the bond failed by pretty much the same percentage of votes, with a much lower population voting the first time and the second time. I think clearly, people don't want the property taxes going up, period. I think it's clear as can be, that people don't need another reason other than not wanting to spend more money.
But Wally, that's your opinion. My opinion is quite different. I think the voters in this district would vote for a bond that they could agree with, that would make sense. I don't think there's a reluctance to vote for something.
I totally
and
disagree.
raise their taxes. Well, you certainly have that right.
Okay,
But your
let's,
opinion is just as good as my opinion.
We can
So-
pick this up later too.
So,
Because we have a discussion on this after we have our presentations. So I would say we have to move ahead with our presentations and get into these discussions a little bit later.
Great.
That's all I have for you for your first questions.
Other questions for Linda?
I guess I just got a comment. I think our charter schools are part of our educational community, and I think you guys should consider them.
And when I said that they're not our issue, they're yours, they have their own entity. Their kids are absolutely a part of our district, and their staff are a part of our district, but they are separate. They have their own governing board, they have their own, so
But we don't,
I'm not
we
looking
won't
to
displace.
alienate the charter schools,
Well,
absolutely not.
we won't displace any other educational communities unless they're charter schools. That's what I heard that's what I heard the administrative team come up with.
And what the administrative team is acknowledging to you is that they are different. That Bethany and Community Roots are, from our perspective, are different agencies. They are their own, they have their own board, they have their own,
Legally, they are.
they're
Or
their
in fact,
own.
they decided to become different. I mean, that was
They're
part of
under
your-
our umbrella, but
We chartered them. It's our
yeah, I'm
charter.
sure that's
As a
legal,
district.
yeah,
They're
I'm sure that's the legal
And
term
the
for it.
ADM flows, they are our kids, the
Absolutely they
ADM
are.
flows through the district minus the 20% that the district keeps. So,
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, they are different, but that doesn't take away our responsibility to work with them to find the solution when they're paying us rent for a facility and things like that. That doesn't take away our responsibility to work with them to include them in this solution. So,
Yeah,
and I think that's what Linda was saying. It's not,
We would absolutely agree.
you know, it's not something that the
And unfortunately, those
administrative
kids
team.
are our kids.
Yeah, it's
They're
not
our
something the
district kids.
administration team was specifically talked about because it is
It's not their direct responsibility.
yeah, it's the board responsibility to work with the charter schools, so.
It is, and I see where you're coming from. However, we also made a commitment as a board that we would honor the community as well. And I think it's important
Oh,
to
yeah.
include them.
I agree.
And
we have an
and not
obligation.
displace them because of, I mean, it sounds like a great plan, but you just totally displaced a school at the same time, and we made a commitment to them too. So I think we really need to take that into
Yeah,
consideration.
I agree. Any other questions for Linda? Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell your team thank you also. Joel, estimates for conversion of the single-story portions of the Schneider Street campus.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity for my first official talk with the board at this capacity. I'm going to present an option that we can obviously dive deeply into that does, I shouldn't say an option, just some figures that does keep community roots at the current Schlater campus. So I just dropped some information in front of you, and I'm going to talk about that briefly before we dive into those numbers and explain my thoughts on it. This information should not be taken and interpreted to do the same things that the recent bond was intended to do. I would liken this exercise to budgeting for purchase of a new vehicle to serve your family's needs in the foreseeable future. While budgeting for this vehicle, you're gonna pick a number and then remove a zero, if that makes any sense. While 30,000 might have been your first budget number for a vehicle that would serve your family's needs, now remove a zero from that. You're gonna have to heavily modify your expectations in every way before you purchase a vehicle for $3,000. That's what we're going to be doing with this scenario that I put in front of you. We're gonna take that $30,000 family vehicle and buy it for $3,000. While I'd much rather look for a long-term permanent solution that would not require infusions of capital in the future, those simply don't exist in any form other than a significant bond. The recently failed bond was designed to be that longer-term solution and not require significant significant capital investments in the near future. So while these numbers in front of you are not firm estimates or bids, they are rough estimates, if you will. I have significant confidence in them. They're based on a lot of research the district has done over numerous years. Part of the process moving forward with these numbers will be hiring appropriate architectural and engineering firms to help us define that scope and confirm some compliance issues that have always been up in the air with any kind of remodel or reuse of the Schlater Street campus. Superintendent Mirando asked me to put together some numbers to make it work for 6, 7, 8 middle schools. You see on the front of this. Schlater conversion estimates, 3 grade levels, 6, 7, 8, with community roots remaining on site. You'll see the $1 million number at the top, which is obviously a number we've been working with for quite a while for off-site improvements. We won't know that until we make it much further down that road with traffic studies and working with the city and what their requirements are.
Have you had any discussions with the city at all?
I have not, no. I think that number is based on previous discussions that have taken place around the district. Site work is just that, minimal site work to prepare this. With this plan, you actually end up with more modular classrooms than what Linda was discussing in that. And the reason for that is to keep community roots on this site, on this campus, and allow them their own space. So you're gonna see a line item there for 5 existing portable classrooms. What that is the reuse of some buildings that we currently have. We have 4 classrooms, modular classrooms at Eugene Field currently. 1 double classroom, 2 singles. We also have a single sitting right here behind the building. None of them are in great condition. They're in good condition, but they're old. They're heavily used. This number would relocate the 4 from Eugene Field to here and do a very light remodel on all 5 of those classrooms, such as some roofing and siding and, you know, some carpeting and some things like that. Try to bring a little life back into them. Some of the site work numbers above that tie into those, getting electricity to them and things like that. The next line item that you'll see there, the upgrade from mechanical and existing single-story structures. A significant portion of the single-story portion of Schlater area that we plan to reuse currently has no heating system in it whatsoever. So that's a big chunk of that. That number represents a very, very light upgrade to that building, if you will. It's meant to cover the basics, very little painting. That definitely is not going to repaint all the classrooms by any means, or anything along those lines.
So the rooftop units we've talked about before?
Yeah, that's what I took the numbers from when we put the last rooftop units on and kind of massaged those numbers to come to this, if you will. So yeah, that's what I'm recommending. There have been other options thrown out there that I don't think are options in my view of providing good air quality and good air turnover and stuff like that. The rooftop units will do that. Additional new classrooms. That's actually, our thought is that we can keep community roots here and make this a 6, 7, 8 with 10 total, 10 classrooms additional to what we have. This number actually represents 11. The reason for that is we have 5. We're moving 5 up here. Going and purchasing 5 more classrooms is, if we go purchase new units or even used units, is kind of tough to do. Most of them are 2 classroom units. They aren't typically a single classroom. So to purchase 5 versus 6, whether they be new, used, wherever we find them, there's really not going to be huge savings there. It does provide us a classroom that some maybe a little buffer there and things. Contingency permits, engineering. There's a lot of things wrapped up into that number. That number is 25% of the above. Typically, if you're just looking at a straight contingency, especially if you were fairly well through the design process, you'd see that a lot closer to 10% in these things. We're a long ways from that, first of all, and I've included a lot of other things besides just your standard things that would fall into contingency, permitting and things like that. I lumped into that line up. So, coming to a grand total of about 2.5 to make that work. That's the thought process so far. So, questions on that so far?
Joel, I'm sorry, processing information, but that 1 million, that's for the traffic impact studies?
It would be for the traffic impact study and then the resulting work from that impact study and whatever else the city may require when we reopen this.
Yes.
Yeah, street improvements.
All the stuff.
All the stuff, yeah,
Yep.
utility improvements.
Yeah.
So that was the figure that last time that the possibility of reopening the site was discussed. Have there been changes in requirements since that last conversation with the city? Do we have
Not that I'm
better figures than the old figure?
Not that I'm aware.
I'm just concerned about the figures. And the site work is electrical for the modulars? Is that correct?
A lot of it is electrical for the modulars. A chunk of that site work is demolition of the old ag shop building. that's out there to make space basically, and to remove the building that's failing. The other piece of that is isolating off the old structure from what we would reuse, the pieces that we would keep. So that's not huge, but basically sealing off that 1938 portion. The 1938 multi-story portion in this plan would stay in place, be untouched, unused, other than being sealed off from access to anyone from the other portions of the building.
So the students in the modular classrooms, what would they do for laboratory facilities?
Under this plan, they would have to traverse into the building. They would be using inside restrooms. This is absolutely figuring on dry, what we would call dry units out there. If we start adding restrooms to them, the cost just goes incredibly high, not just for the unit itself. That's really the small piece. It's the underground facilities. Getting water there and getting it out. It gets incredibly expensive at that point.
And where would they be located at? Where would they be located at?
The relocatables, or I shouldn't say relocatables, the modular structure, because we still have some options there, obviously. This is looking at a lot of different things. If you look at the map that I handed out, we have not necessarily laid that out exactly. We would want to look at some traffic flows to minimize that outside time, if there was outside time, people walking back and forth in the rain. Obviously, that's a big issue for everyone. But I would think in that area, approximately where the old wood shop and ag shop are now, that's going to have to be a piece of it. And I think that's going to be the majority of the work. It's the closest to the main building, two restroom facilities. It's also closest to our current power feed into the campus. So it's going to minimize some costs there, getting it closer, not greatly, but.
Yeah, so those are the 5 redone ones, and those would be community roots, you're saying? Or not?
Not necessarily.
You're just, got it, okay.
Not necessarily. Community roots, I think that discussion is open to the district, and with community roots to discuss what works best for everyone involved. There's been some talk that they would prefer to be, kind of somewhat segregated from the rest of the campus a little bit. We do have 4 classrooms on this end of the building out here that may serve that. The other piece is there is, of course, this parking lot right here near this other single modular, just this side of that, where it says multi-purpose in the middle of that parking lot. That's an area that could easily be utilized as well. Okay.
And then would we be reusing or repurposing the north end out there, the science wing? I think yes, that department's got some of those. Would we be reclaiming those? Or
we would be reclaiming the whole building away from tech and people like that.
Okay.
It would be purely a 6, 7, 8 and community roots. There would still be use, I would expect anyway. The high school uses the gymnasium quite a little bit for practices and some sub-varsity games and things like that. There are also other uses from the community of that area, the mat club wrestling, and obviously there would be some logistics there to work out because we're going to be putting a lot more of our kids in that campus on a daily basis. But I don't think there's any intention. My vision of this is there's no intention to displace people who are currently using things. They may not have some of the space they're currently using, such as the football program has a pretty expansive area out there right now, and they may be.
Lego Robotics is in there too, aren't they?
Robotics is using the small room. If you're looking at that map where it says the gymnasium, there's a small room in the upper right corner of the gym, that long kind of narrow room. They're actually using about half of that right now.
That used to be a weight room, didn't it?
It's the old weight room, exactly. They are using a portion, majority of that room.
Okay.
Not all of it, so. And, haven't discussed them a whole lot in this plan. I think it's pretty clear that robotics isn't going to go away. where they are, that may not be as clear, but they're gonna be shoved out. By any means, so.
Would the multi-purpose room and kitchen be, I assume they would be used for
Yes.
lunchroom?
Yes, they would receive very, very light, just like the other classrooms, very light updates in there. You know, the discussion with that kitchen area is that it's, for the most part, still intact, or intact, and I would agree with that. There are some things that would have to be done in there, but the other option to save some refurbishing in there is currently our high school kitchen, provides food, and, you know, ships it out to a lot of the schools. So I think that could be much easier here because of the proximity, you know, to continue that practice and not have to make a major reinvestment in that kitchen. Not that we would have to if we opened it, but there's some things in there that would have to be brought up to some compliance issues.
It's prepared at the high school and brought over.
Yeah, but yeah, that to me, seems like the simpler thing. Of course, I'm not the one transporting food back and forth every day.
So was there any thought about, we've got a storage area right over here in this building. You used to have some classrooms in there. Was there any thought about building classrooms in that space versus the modulars? My guess is the modulars are going to be less expensive. I don't know that.
So you're talking about this right here in this building, you know, the back room. I haven't had a discussion with that. I mean, is it possible? Absolutely. It's possible to put a classroom in there. Two might get a little crowded, be pretty small, but it is, I suppose, a possibility. Anything's possible. Is it going to be cheaper or more expensive than a modular? I'd have to think that. Look that one through with a little more of a fine-tooth comb before I answer that question. It is a space, it's currently used for district office things, you know, I have thousands of pages of blueprints back there, but that doesn't mean they have to be there. You know, there may be other options for them. I think there's other business office record keeping and stuff like that back there. There's a lot of stuff there, but it could be, yeah, could be a piece of the puzzle.
So Joel, when you talked about the relocatables, those are the 4 modulars, the older modulars. There's somewhere here, I guess, in Eugene Field, is that right? How old are those? And do we know anything about the condition?
I do not know how old they are. One of them is a double classroom unit, more like you would see everywhere today. The other 2 are single classrooms, fairly small units in general. The overall condition, I mean, they're old and they're worn, they're heavily worn, they've seen their lifetime. As far as moving them, that's something that before anyone is going to sign a contract with us agreeing to pick them up and move them, they're gonna wanna inspect them with their people and make sure they aren't gonna move something that's gonna fall apart. We obviously wouldn't want to do that. I have not gone that far into that process.
So that's exactly why I asked the question, because we had a couple of old modulars out here, and I think they were not successfully moved. I think they were falling apart, basically.
They were moved.
They were moved?
They're entirely refurbished. They're in full operation right now.
Oh, okay, great. All right, thank you for that.
You bet.
My gut feeling on those buildings, having been in all 4 of those rooms down there, is that they're structurally sound enough to move. And I'm gonna say that because they are not falling down. You know, the floors aren't sagging, they aren't leaning off to the left or the right, you know, the walls aren't doing anything. They're structurally sound. Obviously, that would require a little further looking before we fix them up and haul them out.
So we don't know yet.
But this is definitely assuming that they move in this scenario.
And the new classrooms is, what'd you say, 6 other, or like 3 sets of doubles?
3 sets of doubles. Now, let me
Is that a
add-
new price or a used?
That is a new price. There are occasionally ones on the used market. There's one out there right now for about $15,000 less than brand new price. It's a 2008 model, I believe it is. It may be gone today. I talked to Modern Building Systems late last week, and they had it, but that does not mean they have it this week, and that's the way the used market works on these things. The used market typically is returned leases. Occasionally, these modular companies will buy them back also, you know, and refurbish them and sell them. They can make some money there when they need to. They will come and go. I don't know of any large quantities that are coming onto the market. That does happen when the schools successfully, when they move to modulars for whatever reason, and then successfully pass a bond, eventually they move out of them, they hope, and sell them, sometimes for $1. Now typically the dollar ones are 25 years old and they've been living in them way too long too. That's a real guessing game whether they're gonna be there. Now, the other piece of this is we've talked about, or I've kind of discussed this as your traditional, what we view as modular buildings, the 2 classroom units with some covered areas outside so people aren't running around in the rain. We've obviously discussed some options for different types of modular construction back in the bond, with building more of a building out of it, but using modular construction, off-site construction. I'm actually touring 2 buildings tomorrow at Woodburn that are constructed that way. I know we've talked about the Jarvis schools as well, and things, and looking into that very thing. I guess I've never been into one of those myself. I've seen them go together. I've seen the YouTube video, if you will, and all that good stuff, but that doesn't get you all the information. So Woodburn High School has, a few years ago, they broke their high school up into, I believe, 4 separate small schools as a part of a grant thing that they received, and one of their buildings that currently serves, I believe, 315 students is entirely modular and looks like a building from the outside. You would not know it's modular. And I've been told that they have an elementary, or at least a portion of an elementary, that has similar construction. Woodburn definitely has the 2-room classrooms, just like we're talking about, scattered around. And, we hear the same things from people. We actually, nobody likes that. You're outside, you're back and forth. It's never a great thing. But I also don't know the exact cost of doing the building thing. If that's gonna be more or less, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna look at that further though.
It does increase instructional staff's student management time and creates some significant loss of time for students if they have to traverse some distance to use the lavatory or wash their hands or something like that. The modulars are dry modulars, as you described. So I think there's some educational time issues.
Yeah.
I think we probably need to look at that first. I'm not sure that's true. Today, they have to take kids down the hallway and then to the school to go to the bathroom. Is that really going to be different going through a couple doors and using, what they're showing it here, going into the gym, using the bathroom in the gym? I don't know that.
They wouldn't even have to go into the gym if you were to put modulars out where the ag building is now. There's some bathrooms right in here in this hallway. They could just go straight in there and use those. At least there were 40 years ago.
I will go back to kind of where I started here, and that is, this plan is far from
Oh, yeah.
the family car that we see sort
We
of
understand.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
in the distant future.
No, I
And with that, one of the words that says we're gonna have to heavily modify our expectations in every way.
There's a couple big
And that's
kickers.
one of them.
There's a couple big kickers on here I think we need to understand better, and that's first, the offsite improvements. Would probably be worthwhile doing some preliminary discussions with the city and understanding exactly what's required and trying to get.
Well, can I chime in on that just for a moment? Because we have had some extensive conversations with the city about it.
Recently?
And the response from the city, which is expected, is that, until we know the actual purpose of the facility, the number of students, the impact in the area, the grade level, and we actually complete a feasibility, or traffic impact study, we won't know the exact full impact. So this is the $1 million that you see, that was actually budgeted for the November bond. That was the value that was used there. So that's best, I think, of an estimate as we can place in there. as determined by the input that we've had from the city with their West Side Land Use Development Plan and a number of other variables that the city's already contributed to that. So until we do the traffic impact study, which is quite expensive, we won't know what's in that figure. We can surely move ahead of that, with the anticipation that this would become a middle school, and we could say it'll have 450 kids on it or whatever, and we can go through that process, there's no doubt about it. But again, the impact study is also somewhat time sensitive, so we'd have to have some kind of time definition related to that as well.
Do you know if they do the study with and without community roots on site as well?
Oh, they can. They,
Just
yes.
to know if the impact is different?
Yeah, well, and I shouldn't answer that so quickly because I've only experienced what I've seen other school districts do. But my understanding is we, as the district, provide them the scope and the usage that we anticipate, grade level, age, numbers, et cetera, and they in turn facilitate this.
Yeah, one of the pieces that they're absolutely going to, a variable in there is what the site is going to be used for, because an elementary has entirely different traffic impacts than a high school per se. And this campus, where it does have a large gymnasium and things like that, there's always some different impacts here, so they're going to want to know what it's for to really fine tune that. That's my understanding.
Sounds like the $1 million question.
It is.
How much does that study cost?
I don't know that I've seen a number on that. Have you?
Because they need to study.
No, and again, the study basis is based partially upon what your scope is. Tom, I can't say for certain whether it's $25,000 or $50,000.
Right,
It's a chunk of change.
It's a chunk.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Good enough, fair enough.
It's going to be a sizable chunk.
Right, absolutely. But it tells us a lot of information. You'd hate to have it go, oh, it's 1.75. That's...
Yeah, exactly.
So that,
Well, but if this was the number,
It's a known unknown.
if this was the number put in for the November bond, it should be
Yeah.
reasonably close. I wouldn't expect it to be 2 million all of a sudden.
Yeah, David, you made a comment. Do you remember, was that relatively higher?
I don't recall what it was. The traffic study?
Yeah, you said that you were surprised about the off-site work.
No, I just was curious about it. I just wondered if this is the same figure that we were using quite some time ago, and if things have changed, if code requirements or any of those things have changed, anything that would inflate that figure of $1 million, that estimated $1 million figure.
It was certainly the number we used in November. I believe it was the number that was used in the previous bond of that in May.
Yeah, it was less. I believe at that time, it was a 750,000 figure, it was in there.
Yeah, so there's been some inflationary costs there. One of the things, when figuring these numbers, in 2012, 2013, when numbers were coming through, the economy was quite different. Commercial construction was in an incredibly different place than it is now. The inflation in commercial construction is outpacing residential by several points, and that will continue, at least as far as we can see. We are seeing much more inflation than what you see in the residential market.
I think we're seeing about 8% a year right now in commercial construction.
I'm real dreamy, I try to lower that.
Yeah. Is there any consideration to the movement of students? You've got, the old building right in the middle there, and how they get from one, you've got the classrooms on the west and the classrooms on the east, and an old high school,
Yeah,
3-story high school right in the middle.
it's going to be logistically challenging.
On hard hats so they can go through the damage to the building.
Yeah, because the reality is, that portion in the middle, to get rid of it is gonna be incredibly expensive, which we're obviously trying to avoid, and we can't use it as a hallway.
And going around it is incredibly inefficient.
And very inefficient. It is
Okay,
far from,
I agree.
I've thought about that, those kids over in those classrooms in that 1958, but the other side of it is, elementaries, schools this thing can be broken apart pretty good into groups.
Yeah.
We have science rooms already in existence that don't need a whole lot, you know,
Yeah.
kind of off to one end, but yeah, there's gonna be some travel.
Yep.
They're gonna have to learn to pack more than one.
It's really not that far. The problem is you have to go outside.
Yeah, or through the gymnasium.
Yeah.
Yeah, or both.
Makes more sense for middle schoolers though than for
Oh, yeah.
young ones,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
because for that reason
Longer legs.
specifically.
Back to the traffic impact study for just a second. I think it's important to know what you get out of the traffic impact study too. I'm saying this because I think there's still going to be considerable uncertainty once that study is done. The traffic engineer looks at the increased capacity, looks at existing capacity, existing issues, and how's that going to change with the new usage, but it doesn't come back and say this is what it's going to cost you to satisfy these requirements. And the recommendations of the traffic engineer aren't necessarily adopted in whole by the city either. It's just one piece of information they're looking at, important piece. So it will give us it'll help us take that next step, but there's still a process of negotiation and discussion with the city and arriving at what that final scope is.
What I heard though, without that, they're not even gonna start negotiating with us.
That's a fact.
Yeah, that traffic study will absolutely not give us a number for what those off-site improvements are gonna cost. It won't even, not even gonna be there. It will direct the city towards what they're going to ask us to do. Exactly. And that is, you know, obviously something that can be negotiated, you know, and work back and forth, but there will be undoubtedly off-site improvements required. We can see some bottlenecks in the neighborhood already that the city is very aware of. And it's made very, very clear when we quit using that building that they were aware of them and that would not be just overlooked.
So after the study is completed and the negotiations are finished, they will tell us what we have to do.
Yes.
And then we'll have a firm figure about the offsite work costs.
Then we could, depending on where we're at, and how quickly we're in the process, we could get some estimates if we hadn't decided we were going with this. The other piece is we could obviously go out to bid immediately for it. There's going to be some engineering and design work goes in that as well. That would be part of that. And potential, yeah, a lot of things going on.
So with that traffic study, would that take into consideration like a time change for when the school would get out? I don't know, I'm trying to think of like all the high school and the grade school and,
Yeah.
you know, do they then tell us when it would be best to have school? Is that how that works, or?
Well, I don't know that they're gonna tell us when it's best, but I can definitely see where you're going, and it would have an impact. If we could tell them that our middle school is gonna be out 45 minutes before the high school, it is going to have an impact on that glut of traffic that happens. How that's gonna change our off-site improvements, I would be
Or
really
for permits
guessing.
or something like that?
It's gonna be venturing out their ways, but I can't help but think it would have an impact on what they're gonna say. If we could say that we were definitely doing that and we were going to do it forever, that may be a piece of the negotiation with the city, you know, is down the road, to get some back off on some of the things, so.
Well, this is a good start. I appreciate all the work that you put into it. One additional question, do any of these estimates address any of the seismic safety issues of the existing parts of the building that we would be using?
Not specifically, no, not specifically.
And how about the seismic integrity of modulars?
Yeah, I think the general feeling out there is they're a single-story wooden structure, square, you know, rectangular box with one roof line. Generally, that's a very seismically sound piece of structure. Where you run into, the big issues you run into with seismic is when you start having broken roof lines, shear points, a lot of exterior windows, you lose that shear wall, and then, of course, unreinforced masonry is probably number one, above all that other stuff. But as far as a modular goes, I think that would be viewed as a very sound structure with being constructed.
I appreciate that. We've learned a lot about seismicity and structure and buildings. more than I ever thought I would know as a layperson. But we haven't specifically ever asked about modulars yet, so the old modulars, I'm just curious about that. Okay, thank you.
I would not be afraid personally to begin with.
Other questions for Joel? Okay, thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Andy, did you have anything to add to what Joel? Okay, moving along, time for some discussion about this whole topic of the Eugene Field facility. Just to kind of kick us off a little bit, I realized after the last meeting that there's a lot of different ideas floating around out there. And which is great. There's a lot of different ideas. That's where we come to a solution. I do think it's time that we as a board start making some decisions and start at least narrowing things. You know, there's some solutions that are going to require another bond, and are we as a board willing to go put another bond out there? If we can, you know, decide, and not even, I mean, we're not going to vote in a work session on anything like this, but even if we can just get an idea of the feeling of the board on some of this stuff, it could kind of start to narrow our focus a little bit, I think.
I think as we discussed tonight, one of the big questions are the off-site improvements that will need to be done and what that consists of. And that's going to be required. In every scenario we've talked about, pretty much, we've talked about putting grades 6 to 8 here. So I think that would be the initial scope, and we should do that work and understand what the scope is going to be.
I just, it's an interesting, I'm so glad we got numbers. We're starting to talk about what we think this would cost to bring kids here, and it's the way I would, you know, just one of the ways I think about it is that, you know, I think there's a possibility a bond could be passed. And just one way to think about it is we're talking about $2.5 million here at Slater. And we can already kind of see what we're gonna have, not much, or I don't think it's just all, it's piecemeal. What would you do with $5 million at Eugene Field? And $5 more million in the rural schools for a $10 million bond?
Tom, you've said it a couple times that you think a bond would pass. What's your reasoning behind that?
Because I've been speaking with lots of, it's interesting because there was lots of, right after the bond, you get on Facebook and you read a lot of the stuff, and there seems to be a lot of finger pointing going around, and it didn't take too long for some of these people, some of these opinion leaders on both sides are starting to talk. They're finding a lot of room of agreement. We actually, you may have heard about a meeting last Friday. There was a lot of yeses and no leaders in the meeting together, and they were finding common ground and learning a lot. And I think that I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's a real exploration. I mean, if you really, if we look at what 2.5 million is going to buy us, and think of what we just talked with some guys who just had some pretty good ideas about buildings. They've got good track record, and I'm not giving up on it yet. It'd be a slight, you know, I think if we paused a bit, I just think there's an opportunity that you could.
Well, we've been down these roads. We've been down all these roads about refurbishing Eugene Field. We've looked at all this stuff.
How many times? I'm sorry.
We've looked at all this stuff. We as a board decided we weren't interested in refurbishing Eugene Field. That it doesn't make sense to spend between $5 and $10 million in that old building on that site.
I agree.
So,
I agree that the board has that. How many times? 6, 7 times now? But the voters have always had a different opinion. And we've never put the refurbishment of Eugene Field on the bond, on the ballot.
I don't think it's in the district's best interest to go for a bond. Ask voters to another bond third bond in What would that be?
6th, 7th, 8th. Yeah, I just.
Plus, there's not, physically, there's not enough room there on that
Well,
side.
it would take, you would have to.
Because of all day kindergartners, we physically don't have enough
No,
room.
no, you wouldn't, I mean, I would just, if this is just kind of a discussion that, if I wish to remodel my house and I don't have a lot of money, I say, these are my wants and my needs, and I say, I got $75,000, Mr. Contractor, what can you do? And you just ask around, I was,
But Eugene Field isn't like remodeling a house. You can't, once you break into that building, you can't just say, okay, we're just gonna do the plumbing and the electrical.
well, no, that's why you got more zeros on the end of it. I mean, we're talking 5 million, not 50,000. We never came up with any solutions, obviously, and I didn't, the meeting was left with a lot of people nodding their head, and there was some, especially in the no community, there were people that wanted to vote yes on something. And I drive, it's especially, I think the historical aspect of a lot of the folks in this community, I don't live in Silverton, I live in Scotts Mills. I did live I owned a house on Pine Street for a couple of years, so I've been in the town for a bit. But I drive into Silverton, and it says entering historic Silverton. We went to the Christmas lights thing the other night, we're walking back to our car at Robert Frost, and it says historic shopping downtown. It's an important part. I would like to, and I would never leave the school there. This is not the ideal solution. I wonder if there's an opportunity to start to retrofit a building and then sell that asset in 12 years. We'll be, and then for public use, for whatever reason, commercial use. That minimums everybody dreams about.
I think I would
It's
rather
just-
save our $10 million and let somebody else refurbish the building and put kids in a place that's better for kids.
Or use the $10 million for.
Boy, Mr. Chair, I don't know if this is really much better for kids. And I will just, anyway, there was a lot of agreement, and I'll just.
We've also heard from staff at Eugene Field that said they would much prefer to be in modular classrooms in the Eugene Field building. I think
Well,
it's
as is,
I think it's
disagree with
important that we
that.
listen to the people who are in that building every day of the week also. So,
I'll be listening.
just my opinions, but
So I'm wondering how much money we really have to work with. I mean, at this point, we talk about if we don't do a bond, because honestly, I don't really see that happening anytime in the near future. That's just from the people I've talked to. So how much money do we really have to work with? We talk about having assets, and Linda brought up that we have to build, the area outside of Robert Frost. What else do we have? We have Eugene Field that we can sell. Yeah, I think we should contact the minimums and get that going. I think that would be awesome. But I mean, after that,
property at
there's
Mark Twain.
property at Mark Twain. But what else do we have? What is that number that we have to work with? Because right now, yeah, we just throw out all these plans that, this would be the best solution, let's do modules. It's temporary, it's not gonna be a permanent solution. We have what money to work with, because, we keep throwing out ideas, but where's the money? And so if we're really gonna move forward with something without a bond, we have to have a budget, obviously. So what is that? What do we have? Are we selling those properties? And what do we have currently to put towards those properties? Because without a number, you can't make another plan.
So,
I know.
Would you like me to comment on that?
yeah, please do it.
And I shared with the board at your November 24th work session just some preliminary information of sort of what you have currently, Julie. And I'm just looking at the document right now. You do have about $1.5 million in reserve, and I use that word reserve fairly loosely because it's what you have in your capital funds project account and what you have from your increased balance from your construction excise tax. So the recommendation at the same time, however, was to preserve that $1.5 million for your use for maintenance projects in your, especially your rural schools, other schools other than the Schlater campus, as you move ahead. I think you need to have that reserve in order to meet the needs of this school district. But with that aside, you still have a balance of about $660,000 coming in from the sale of the Westfield property. And based upon the last 5 years, I believe, of your construction excise tax revenue, you're averaging about $60,000 or $65,000 a year in construction excise tax. Economy's turning around, building is improving. The last year, it was closer to $90,000. So there's a little speculation with that, but if you use the $65,000 figure, I think you have something to go on with that. In addition, Monitor School is essentially wrapped up. We still may be waiting on the last payment. I can't recall for certain, but it's very close to being wrapped up. And the Steelhammer property did just sell, and you sold that for $433,000. You've received $100,000 of that, so you still have $333,000 due within 24 months. So when you think of those figures, 6, 7, 8, you're at about $900,000 or so in revenue coming in over the next 6 years, because that's what you have left on your Westfield contract. And then continue into the future with whatever your construction excise tax brings in. And again, I realize this is just for conversational purposes. We can surely vet this out a little bit more. And there'll have to be some speculation as well with things like the 4 acres of Mark Twain, which you can conversation about. If the board is interested in doing so, we've heard from the local folks that there would be some interest in that property, and it may be something that could sell fairly quickly for multifamily use. And we've never considered anything with the Robert Frost property, admittedly, and there you still have 15 or 17 acres below Robert Frost School. Now again, I think I'll throw caution your way as well. I mean, there's a reason the school district has its property, is to help address the needs of the school district for years, decades to come. And that just needs to be part of your conversation.
So basically, we have a little under $1 million to work with, and our cheapest plan to go with at the moment is a little like $2.5 million. I mean,
Based upon the figures we've seen today.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I just don't. How are you going to move people without the money? It's you're $1.5 million off to do the cheapest, quickest fix.
Yeah, it's no easy solution.
So didn't Jervis fund their project through their operating budget?
They did, and actually Jervis funded their project through their operating budget, but with the anticipation that the property sales of, I don't recall exactly, well, like 2 or 3 of their schools would be used to pay that debt service. They, I believe, were issued 20-year, had a 20-year agreement with their finance company with they had the option of paying it off early. They had to pay for that. There was an adjustment in the interest rate to pay for that. In your case, relying upon some of the conversation I heard, if you were not to do a bond and you were to think just practically of 13 years out, if you were to structure a payback, have a debt service structured 13 years out, what could that look like? We can get those figures based upon $2 or $2.5 million. We can surely look at that, and obviously you're paying interest on that, so you'd have to pay for that. And we could surely ask the option of, is it possible, if you were to sell a piece of property, that you could pay that debt service early without penalty, or what that could look like? I can get those figures.
Yeah, we really need that information before we can make any sorts of decisions, I think.
And the other piece is, should we go ahead and do a study for this, the traffic study? We're gonna need that almost no matter whatever we do. If we're gonna utilize this site at all, we need that traffic study.
How long is the data good for?
I don't know, but I'll find out.
It's a good 15 years or 20 years, yeah.
Andy, do you know how, do we have an estimate of what the SBC would be for this part of the project? And is that included in the $1 million kind of figure, or is that in the $500,000 permits and fees?
My understanding, Owen, is that the SDCs would be minimal, if non-existent.
It would just be traffic.
Because the systems are in place. It would be traffic. You have water, you have power, you have gas, you have everything.
Right, you're not making new connections for those things?
Correct.
Sure.
Correct.
So, things I'd like to say. I think I'd just like to remind everyone that it took 3 attempts, 2 failed attempts and 1 finally successful attempt to finish the second part of the high school, phase 2. I think bonded debt is the best way to pay for these things. When you start borrowing against the general fund, which is really designed to support the instructional programs here and to maintain staff, you're taking a pretty significant risk, especially if funding from the various sources declines. And the history of funding and education in Oregon is a roller coaster. And there's no reason to believe that that roller coaster is not going to be our reality into the foreseeable future. Funding from the state is dependent entirely on income tax revenue. Our property tax is limited. Both houses of Congress are now solidly Republican, and we may look at some funding cuts, I think, in federal aid to public education. I think many people think that's pretty much a given. We also lost timber revenues, which in this district is not a significant amount of money. I mean, not a huge amount of money, but maybe a significant amount. Andy, do we know what we get annually?
I can't cite that right now.
Okay. So, I mean, we're not as dependent on it as some of the districts, for example, in Josephine County or Douglas County, but it's still a significant factor. When you start compiling all of these factors, adding them all up, we're taking some hits right now. Education funding under the governor's budget is flat for K-12. Most of the additional money is going into preschool, basically, birth through kindergarten. We have both houses in Oregon solidly Democratic, but the guess among the people who work there is that that's not going to change a whole lot because these people really support public education, but there's so many needs. And we talked the other day about, when I was in Salem, about facilities grants. They're trying to put something together that may have $200 million available to school districts for matching facilities grants, and that's not a reality yet. But we talked about the things that the state of Oregon has a direct interest in terms of the seismic safety issue. And the figure for remediation of those buildings is somewhere between $4 and $6 billion. So there's a lot of money involved, and there's certainly no assurance that the money that's going to be spent by this legislature in the next biennium is going to flow to public education. So if we have a downturn, we're likely to see a significant downturn. In the past, we've been able to deal with program retention and avoid reductions in force through our reserves and the use of our reserves to even things out. So in the years immediately after the financial crisis, this district was fairly unique in the state of Oregon in that we didn't have significant reductions in force or instructional program cuts. But that wasn't the case in other districts. We've depleted our reserves pretty much. And we've been talking as a board in the past about how do we build those back up.
They have been building back up.
They are building back up, but they're not where they used to be, and they're not where they should be, according to the conversations that we've had as a board. And my question is, how do we do that and do all the other things and responsibly plan for what may be significant cuts in funding? So I favor a bond for that reason. And I think, Tom referenced what's happening on social media. I'm a brand new person to social media. I talk to kind of a generation of people that really aren't engaged in social media and maybe aren't even internet savvy. But I'm hearing the same thing. If you give us the right thing to vote for, we want to vote for something. But we just haven't felt that the board has come forward yet with the right scenario. And I think you have to keep in mind that 50% of the voters, roughly, and 50% of the tax base in the unified Silver Falls district is outside the city limits of Silverton. So when you're proposing the bond that does all of these wonderful things, and I do think that they were wonderful proposals for the city, the in-town schools in the last bond scenario, it wasn't lost on the people outside the city of Silverton that the amount of amount that they would be getting from that bond was somewhat less than the cost of new furniture for Mark Twain School. I mean, that's the reality of it. If they're gonna pay 50% of whatever we propose, they need something more than that. I mean, that's just the politics of it, in my view at least.
I think that's out there. There's also a really strong opinion that just leave us alone.
Well,
And that's I'm hearing that loud and clear.
yeah, I've heard from a lot of people also that are, you know,
So-
just what, they don't want their taxes to go up. They're not, I haven't heard any opinions about, well, people say you need to get out of Eugene Field. I've heard that loud and clear, but I've also not related to the bond failure necessarily. I just
So it all
don't
de-
put those two together.
It all depends on who you talk to, and obviously we talk to different people. And that's kind of my problem with not wanting to know this board and administration not wanting to know the why. Why did the bond fail? When we did the high school bond efforts, we did the research every time. We did scientific research. It wasn't a voluntary online poll where people responded or didn't respond. We actually had pollsters, professional pollsters come in and do the survey that gave us a lot of information, a lot of direction about the next bond effort. So we haven't done that kind of thing with the future of Eugene Field and what it should be. We have our own ideas, each one of us. We talk to different people who have their own ideas. I'm carrying a significant interest in saving Eugene Field now that we've been through this entire sort of difficult and tortuous process, because that has education value too in the community. People start to pay attention, they start to listen, they start to think about issues. I mean, usually what's happening in the school district and on the school board is pretty near the bottom of most people's list of priorities. They have work, they have family, they have kids, they have grandkids, they have all kinds of stuff to do. So unless it rises to the level I think is rising right now, once again, in my view, a lot of people just aren't paying attention. I think that's changing. So.
I just think we have a situation in Eugene Field that needs to be remedied. I think it's a situation that we need to remedy as soon as we can. I think the situations with that building have gotten, multiple times worse just in the last few years. Just because the building, in my opinion, is at the end of its useful life. I think it makes no sense I think it's irresponsible to think about plopping $5 to $10 million into that building on the same size building in that site, which is what you'd be getting. It just seems wrong. I think granted, if we do some kind of a temporary solution with modulars right now, granted, that's temporary and it's far from ideal. It's far from ideal, but I think we also need, with that, if we were to go with a solution like that, we also need to keep looking long range. And this might be a 10 or 12 year solution for now, but we also as a board need to be looking long range and talking about other options and what we're going to do, with boundary changes and all sorts of things. Maybe we can adjust boundaries a little bit and shift some kids around, but that's not a quick fix. That's a long-term solution also, because we always grandfather people in if they're already at a school. It takes a while for a boundary change to have its effect. So,
The reality is all the two schools are full right now, so
yes.
there's not a lot of wiggle room.
I just think, I think we need to, excuse me, but I think we need to, as a board, buck up and make some decisions and move forward with this. I'm not in favor of going for another bond. I don't think it's in the best interest of the district. I don't think another bond wouldn't be a long-term solution either. If you're talking about plunking $5 million into Eugene Field, I know we've heard that can be refurbished for $5 million. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a long ways from the experts that we've hired to look at it. And you're not gonna do it for that. You plunk $5 million into that building, you probably wouldn't even see it, and that's gonna be a temporary solution also. That's gonna be a 10 or 12 year solution. And then we're like, well, what do we do with Eugene Field now?
If it was a seismically upgraded building, would it have value to sell? I'd love to sell that building in 12 years.
I think it's lost its useful life as a school, but I think
Oh, yeah.
somebody can come in and if they want to preserve it, I think that would be exciting. That
If
would be
somebody else
really
wants,
cool.
if somebody else wants to do it,
Oh,
then I
sure,
don't,
but
I
as
don't
a
think the district
school-
should be spending
No,
money on that.
as a school, I think it's come to its lifespan, but I do believe, when we talk about its usefulness, I still think there's a part of it that can be part of the community, and you would hope that somebody that would purchase it would, renovate it to a point where it was still part of the community, but, you can't always have that, but I do think its useful life as a school has happened.
Well, I guess I would say that its useful life as a school in its current state is at an end,
Yes.
or very close to an end.
And I'm saying if you go for a bond to put $5 million into that building, you're still at a 10-year solution at the most.
Well, it might be a better solution. This is my thinking. I am a preservationist, but not in terms of district property. My interest in Eugene Field is that it is a district asset and that we could use it for a school for another 10 to 12 years, and it might be a much better place for students, even given the limitations of the location, than what we just talked about in terms of modulars at this site, the Schlater site, and the sort of hodgepodge nature of that, and the reusable modulars. Now, let me finish. I won't go on forever. And the district would have an asset. We would have an asset that we could reuse for other purposes. Who knows? Maybe the community college would want to locate there at the end of 10 or 12 years when we can. We're doing a lot more with community colleges. One of the proposals that the governor has made is that community college will be free for all Oregon students. There'll be no more tuition. And I think that may have buy-in in this legislature. And we'll know in this biennium. But there's every possibility. We have many possibilities with that building if we preserve it as a district asset and utilize it for a while. And it doesn't have, I'm not talking about, someone raised the issue of 21st century learning space. None of the interior walls, as I understand it, are load-bearing walls. A refurbishing or a renovation of that building would involve a complete interior tear-out in the first place, as I understand it. And it could be reconfigured into anything that we want in terms of a 21st century school. At the end of 10 years, we would have an asset that we could sell, reuse, repurpose. We could do all kinds of things with it, rather than just throw it away.
What do you do with the kids while you're doing all this?
You can do this in the summer. You could do this in 2 summers. You can start with the seismic work and do the second phase in the second summer. The kids would not be disrupted during the school year, and they would be safe and have hot water and ventilation and all those things after the first year.
Dave, you're saying all those things as a fact can be done, but I don't think we've seen from any, I don't feel like we've seen anywhere credible, anything credible that says that we can do that. I think, the people I talk to and that are interested in refurbishing that and that have ideas will sit around at a meeting and talk in those ways that these things can be done for these amounts of money that are just speculation. And so the people are in favor of that. My impression has been that people are in favor of something that isn't really possible to be done.
That's what I would agree with you on.
So
According to CCS engineering.
If I could,
my experience, I don't have a ton of experience remodeling, but I can tell you, I've done some pretty significant house remodels, complete guts, and it frankly costs more to do that than it does to build new houses. And I've built 100 new houses here in Silverton. So I really don't think that it can be done for the kind of numbers. Don't get me wrong, I think it can be remediated. I just don't think the numbers are there. And as far as it being an asset, I wonder, as a commercially viable asset, I really wonder if it is. I see over at the industrial site a lot of true assets that, should be employed in this community, and they sit there for years and years and years and years. Those are buildings, sure, now at this point, I'm sure they need some work, and that's now happening, but you look downtown Silverton, there's lots of really cool vacant buildings. Really cool buildings that have been completely redone. that are vacant. So I don't know whether or not that would be an asset. I think if we put that money in, I don't think we can expect to see it out in terms of an investment in money dollars. I do see us, if we put $1 million into offsite improvements at Schlater Street, I do see that as an investment in the long term. And I guess I do see that as a step in the right direction. It doesn't get us where we want to be, obviously, but it's a step in the right direction instead of taking a step back and, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years down the road, another board is, again, trying to figure out how to move out of Eugene Field.
Well, I just wonder 10, 12 years down the road, you've got this, I'll call it a hodgepodge at Slater, and people are just gonna say that's good enough. Are they gonna wanna?
I don't know.
Fix that up?
I hope they don't say that.
Well, that's why I would never call, if there was a remodel at Eugene Field, I would never expect it to be an investment. I just would assume you would recoup some of the cost. I kind of have a model, something I thought about, is that if I want to fix up an old Ford pickup, I take it to someone who likes to fix up old Ford pickups, and I feel like we've been talking to someone who wants to sell some Dodges. As far as ECS, my opinion. And we just met with some people. I met with some other concerned citizens Friday with some people who like to fix up old buildings. They fixed up a lot of old schools in Salem. They're good at what they do, and I think I kind of wonder if it would be okay over Christmas break to walk them through the building. No students are there, not disruptive, and just see what they think. Kick the tires. It wouldn't cost nothing. That's okay.
I certainly support that. I think we don't know what we don't know.
Well,
They may have something more to know.
I think we do know what we do what we know, and I'm getting a little tired of hearing about the faults in the ZCS studies. That's just one of the groups we've had up at Eugene Field, and I'm getting a little tired of hearing about the faults in that. That was a neutral party that we hired to come in. They're not going to give us tainted information. They don't care if we build new or remodel. They came in to analyze that building, to give us, their expert opinion as a licensed contractor, to give us their expert opinion of what it would cost to upgrade that building.
Sure.
And we had them look at every building in the district. We've heard about the Butte Creek cafeteria and how we've had them look at that, and why is their opinion on Butte Creek sound, but their opinion on Eugene Field isn't? So I think we've done our homework. We've had the studies. I don't know how much longer we can talk about this, to be honest.
Well, I mean,
we've had the studies. I'd like to know, just to switch gears a tiny bit, I'd like to know, because what this other proposal would require a bond. And I would just like to take an informal poll of the board to see who would be interested in going for a bond in the next 6 months and who isn't. If we can do that. Informal, no vote. I'm not in favor of it, personally.
Me neither.
I'm not in no favor of it.
I'm not.
Well, I am.
I'd like to know more information. I'm just.
First of all,
I don't. Go ahead.
How can you go out for another bond in 6 months? And secondly, the quicker we get out of Eugene Field, the way I look at it, the quicker we can start making money on that property. We can sell it and get a tax base to use for our schools.
And certainly is that. I don't know. I mean, every discussion I've ever had when we get more serious about selling Eugene Field, I keep hearing it's worth nothing. The building in its current state's a liability. Have we ever had an evaluation of that been done?
It was appraised in about 2003, I think, or 2004 by an appraiser, but that was it.
What'd they come up with?
I can't recall, and that's 10 years ago.
Wasn't much. I mean, obviously must not have been much. I think we remembered it. But anyway, I'm just worried that, a 75% Eugene Field is better than this. And we, ZCS came in and judged it to a very high standard, and they did a good job. But, if they, what would they judge this?
ZCS isn't the only one that came in.
No, I know, I don't disagree with that. They did a fine job.
And when the opinion of an unlicensed contractor is half of what the licensed contractor says, that says a lot to me.
Well, Real, if
I'm not talking-
we were gonna go for a bond and get some dollars, why would we choose to put more dollars in Eugene Field versus Slater? Something we know we're gonna keep for the long term.
Well, because to do Slater, this is just a get by bonding. In 12 years, the high school bond pays off. And that's when we really have the ability to spend some money, and then we could do it right. Then we could do Slater right.
That's 12
So
years for those kids.
Well,
I'm not
and
for a new bond, only because I don't think it's gonna pass. That's the only reason. I believed full-heartedly in the last bond, and I really thought it was a good solution for our kids. And I don't hear community feedback where they're gonna pass anything. So, and I don't think putting any money into Eugene Field is gonna make the solution any better. It's not a long-term fix either. Moving towards Slater is kind of what we've always been talking about, that I think that's the direction we should go, but we just don't have the money to do that either.
Well, it's right, and Julie, that's kind of what I keep getting at, is that we're gonna have something not perfect. We don't have the money to do it. And then if 10 years we can pass a bond to do something, now the kids are in the way to do the project, we gotta move them out of the way, do the project and move them back in. And that's,
But we're starting out spending a lot less money for the temporary solution at Schlater than the temporary solution at Eugene Field.
but what about the cost of moving the kids out, moving them back in? We're not setting ourselves up for the proper Schlater campus.
Well, Tom, for the same reason you suggested to me about maybe having people get to that mode where they say, well, this is good enough, we just gotta replace it. I actually would worry more about that by doing a remodel in town,
Yeah.
where people would say, gosh, we just spent 5 or 7 or 8, 9 million, whatever we spent, and then they would say, well, gosh, for another 10 million or 8 million or whatever, we can now take the next step there. I just see that, I could definitely see that line of thinking where we would actually lock ourselves in even further into Eugene Field, but.
And stories change over time, similar to the high school, where we intentionally went in with building a starter high school with 2 grades, and people forgot that wasn't
Right.
full.
Yeah.
You're right, you would definitely hear people saying, I thought you guys.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna take care of that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Andy, maybe we could look at getting some figures if we were to, say, borrow a couple $1 million. If there's any way we could make payments on that with some of or how that would relate to some of the surplus properties we have, and, money coming in from the construction excise tax, if we could make payments without tapping into the general fund, or that whole scenario.
What do you think about moving ahead with the traffic study?
I'd like to hear from, I'm in favor of it, as long as it doesn't expire in 30 days or something like that. I'm sure it takes longer. It's good for longer than that.
So we could get some details on that then.
We find out how long it would be good for too.
Yes.
I mean, 30 days, 2 years, 10 years, I
Right,
think that
you have
makes
to
a
ask
big
the right
difference.
questions.
Okay.
So let's think about some of this stuff seriously over Christmas, and I really, we've talked tonight about bonds and all sorts of stuff, but I really do think that we need to start narrow the focus and to figure this out. I think we need to, my opinion, we need to get kids out of Eugene Field, and I think we need to set a timeline and trust the expert people we have working in our district to come up with a viable solution. I say that with the caveat that the board also needs to be able to make that decision with some ideas in the back of with some ideas in our head about what we're going to be doing with the plan, sort of in place. Whether all the details of that plan are completely in place down to the minutest detail, I don't know if I don't think that's necessarily necessary, but at least to have an idea of how we're moving forward.
So back to a question that we didn't answer. Would it hurt anything during the break if we had a licensed contractor whose integrity is pretty much beyond reproach, walk through the Eugene Field building and see if the figures that we have had generated are accurate or not, in their opinion?
Can I comment on that, Tim?
Yes,
I
please.
appreciate that. Let me just lay a little foundation. I think the integrity of what you provide as a board is based upon the research that you've done, and the qualification, the qualifying of people, whether they be individual vendors or vendors such as ZCS Engineering. They are a qualified vendor. Now, I don't know anything about the qualifications of the other vendor, David, and I'm not making a judgment on that. But what I can tell you is that the reliability of the estimates and the full evaluation study that ZCS Engineering provided you was not just based upon a couple of hours walking around the building. It was based upon a full 2-day walkthrough evaluation, interview of staff, administration discussion around programming, anticipated enrollment, the impact of full-day kindergarten, the impact of 2 district-wide special education programs with highly impacted medical needs, the anticipation of an ELL program, what that looks like is going to change over the next number of years, and representatives of ZCS Engineering and BLRB architects at the table, at the task force meetings, over a period of months, coming up with that reliable figure. In my opinion only, to expect another contractor to come in and spend a few hours in a building without going through what I consider to be an integral piece, and that is having all of the other elements in place, and then comes to you and says, we think we can do it for $5 or $7 million, I think it damages your credibility. I believe it does as a board, simply because that contractor has not had the luxury and the appropriateness, as far as I'm concerned, of being at the table over weeks and months and going through the same processes that you as a board approved when you hired that contractor to do that for you, that study. So if you want to bring in another vendor to say, let's see how it compares to the figures that we already have, okay, you have some new figures. But that new vendor is not sitting at the table, has not sat at the table, has not interviewed everyone, doesn't have all the other pieces that need to be in place for it to be a credible response to what you need as a school district.
I totally agree.
Well, I'm not, ZCS did a fine job, they did a wonderful job.
So Tom, I guess I don't understand what bringing another vendor in would do.
Because, let me, I completely understand the premise of my argument is that they came in and studied Eugene Field to death, and not to death, I mean, they did a great job, and this is what it costs to bring up the perfect educational standard. We can't do that, we don't have the money for that. And so, this Slater Street option is now, Eugene Field was, this was the estimate to bring it up to the proper standard. But we're way lower than that standard with this solution over at Slater, aren't we?
Yeah, but that's a temporary solution, Tom.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it?
And then you've got 12 years, if you want to go out for a bond, then you've got time to do that research.
Okay. You get things in place like that, I don't know, and like I said, I'm concerned that those kids are now in the way of the project you described. We gotta move them out of the way, move them back in, it costs a lot.
I don't think they would be in the way. If we demoed Slater,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
You just infill in,
they could put a new building there, the kids would be out of the way.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Okay. Fair enough. I just said we've lowered this standard for Slater, and now we should also lower the standard for the Eugene Field, and that's just what this vendor, it's just, they had lots of options, lots of good discussions, lots of buildings to go visit, just suggestions, approaches, and that's.
But Andy, what Andy pointed out, that is perfectly the case. I mean, Owen can probably contest to this, that when you bid a job, there's nothing worse than not having the same scope of work.
Well, it would be a different scope, it's a different job.
It's a different job.
That's what I would suggest, is proposing a get-by solution, something less. We're lowering our standard for Slater, therefore can we not lower our standard for Eugene Field?
But unfortunately,
But it's
building
also-
apples and oranges.
It's a totally different animal.
Well,
You know, you break into that building, then your standards automatically go up because of code requirements.
I thought we voted to close Eugene's Field School,
No, we voted to accept a recommendation.
To close Eugene Fields.
to close Eugene.
And part of the recommendation list was we were gonna get a bond, and it's just the bond.
No, part of the recommendation was recommending we go for a bond.
Okay.
Eugene
Well-
Field, the
Yeah.
closure of Eugene Field wasn't contingent on getting a bond.
Okay.
So, in my mind, it should just be when we're getting out of there.
No, do whatever you want.
I mean, that should be the discussion.
Yeah. I just, fair enough, I mean, I made my, I think, I made my opinions clear.
I agree with Andy's comments about having somebody else at this point, go through and do a casual walkthrough. I don't think that would be helpful to us and really would only have the potential to be harmful to us. Like you said, they've got no, I don't think there's any accountability there, which I think is important. And I think that's a very different when you do have somebody that, when we go out for a RFP and ask somebody to come in and do it, I think there is a lot higher degree of accountability and, I just, well, again, for all the reasons Andy said, I'm not in favor of having anybody else go through the building unless we, unless we were to decide and take a vote and go out and hire somebody else to go through it. But I'm not in favor of that either. That would be the condition that I would impose, I guess.
So I think it's interesting. I think the conversation that we're having here this evening about, possibilities and advice from consultants very much parallels the discussions that were happening at the county a couple of years ago with Courthouse Square. And they had Portland architects and Portland consultants come in and go through enormous amount of process and meetings and discussions and very expensive evaluations. And the recommendation of this group was that it would cost $55 million to rehabilitate Courthouse Square, which was built improperly. And the county was going to tear it down. And they had basically a second opinion, and they have remediated the building for $25 million. And so it will go through its entire normal lifespan. And the local people who did that advice were out of the first go-round. So I just think that there's something to think about there. People from outside the community, and they have different ideas and different standards, and they're usually much more expensive, and their recommendations are much more expensive.
But it was in the right location. So that's huge.
Courthouse Square also isn't a 92-year-old building. It's in a crappy location for a school. So, it's not. Another informal poll. Who still thinks we should move forward with closing Eugene Field in a reasonable amount of time? Informal board poll.
We already voted on it.
I'm gonna
Yeah, we
abstain.
voted on that already. It should be,
It's not a vote, I'm just curious. I think we need to have some direction.
Yeah, no, you know my opinions. Let's flesh out the numbers for for our Slater Street solution. That'll help us out. Let's just keep moving forward with that.
Okay.
This is fine stuff, what we're talking about. This is good.
What about the traffic impact study? Shall we go ahead with that, or?
Well, it sounds like we need some information from Andy yet.
Okay, okay. And maybe some financing information.
One other piece that we haven't talked about is, can we get a little more work done on the rooftop heating systems? We've got kind of an old number here, but we work about bringing some folks in. I know we can't go for a real RFP, but can we at least get a couple of judgment costs on
There he is.
update it?
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, that number
Just
was-
refresh it.
Yeah, that number was inflated, because of the age of it, if you will. So I figured that in there, we can fine tune that for sure a little bit.
I think it'd be helpful.
Any other discussion?
Just one comment. At the last work session, when we discussed the temporary nature of the Slater Street modular solution, we had some disagreement between the chair and vice chair about the duration of that temporary solution. And I think you said 2 years, and Wally said 20 years. So my guess is closer to 20 years if we actually do this. And I think 20 years and how many cycles of children in this sort of messy arrangement is really not a good idea. I think it's a very poor use of district assets and district funds. That's my opinion.
I don't remember saying 2 years, but I do say things I don't remember quite a bit. But I think we also established tonight we're looking about 10 year. I don't think it would be a 20 year.
Yeah, if you could,
Discussing 10 years.
yeah, I'd just like to see a good layout as quickly as we can, and what it looks like in the flow of students, and how much outdoor walking is gonna be done, and, you know, I just like seeing kids and staff connected in hallways, and I look at the map, look at the signs. As soon as you can, so we can have things to
We can do that. I mean, the more detail you get, the more.
The
you pay
more
for it.
detail, the better.
You know,
It narrows us down, it narrows us down.
But we
Costs
get,
money,
but we
though.
get paid
Costs
for that,
money.
so no, I hear you, and we surely get detail, but
Oh, I don't need nothing on CAD, just just scratch out the things and
Okay.
get the magic marker out, that's all I don't need.
we do that.
Yeah, I don't know, no pay no one to just, no, you can.
David, earlier you said you was elected by the public. Can you clarify, what was that?
We're elected by the public.
No, you said you was elected
We are
as
all-
a, no, you
we're
said
all-
you were,
School board members are elected to represent the public's interests
Yes.
here. We are the public's voice. We hire one employee, the district superintendent.
I'm aware of that.
Okay, so, I mean,
It sounded like you was a spokesperson for special interest.
my special interest is the public,
That's good.
the public interest.
That's good.
And I do my best to do my homework and represent that interest.
That's good.
Okay, I don't represent any other special interest.
Okay, we have one action item tonight. Approved contract with Sodexo Education for district food management services for the remainder of the 2014-15 school year. Had a presentation our last regular session. Is there a motion?
Move for approval?
Second?
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, with that, we're adjourned. Everyone, have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Yes.